right, so today we are inside the Sally Port at the Shasta County Jail. This is where, when any of our allied agencies bring in somebody to be booked into the Shasta County Jail, this is where the whole process starts. And today we are going to talk about the process for determining whether an inmate stays in custody or is released. And we're to talk about that, we have Captain Logan Stonehouse, who is the Custody Division Commander for the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. So Captain, thank you for being here today, and we're going to explain this to the folks a little bit. First things first, a lot of people ask, what right now, Captain, is our current capacity, our current population for the Shasta County Jail?
So I'd like to comment a couple different numbers there. So if in fact the jail was fully operational, we had no levels shut down, we had no housing units shut down, our capacity would be about 484 inmates, 484 beds,
Okay.
in order to house the entire facility. And then, since we do have a floor of the jail shut down, our current capacity, if we were completely maxed out, would be about 324 beds, 324 inmates on that. Now, of course, the Shasta County has a court capacity order, which we only run 90% of the population, and that's to prevent overcrowding, which brings that number down to about 292 inmates is what our capacity would be currently with the level shutdown.
Okay, so we have to keep below that number, even
Yes.
if we were at full capacity.
Yes.
Okay, so essentially we are at capacity. Every bed that we could give, we essentially have somebody in it.
Yeah, well, you know, that number fluctuates daily based on the population, based on classifications of inmates. So our daily population always kind of varies, but it just, that number's always up towards that 90%. Not always there, but you know, sometimes there are open beds depending on classifications.
Okay, so we're obviously very full depending on how the day goes, but so let's talk about, you know, that process. One of our local law enforcement agencies, one of our allied partners, or even our deputies arrest somebody and they bring them here. They have to book them here where we're at. Let's go step by step now to look at just how it is determined whether that person is going to stay in custody or if they are going to get released. So maybe let's start there.
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty in-depth process in order to do that. Obviously, the agency would bring them in here where we're standing into our booking area. That subject would be booked. Then our booking deputy would look at the charges, look at the bail amounts, look at those sorts of things, and go to the watch commander, give them all that information, and they would determine, there's three different types of housing basically, whether we must keep somebody, such as like a homicide suspect or something like that, those of which we would like to keep if we can, if there's space available, and those that we would release because it's let's say a misdemeanor or something along those lines that we're just not going to house right now because of our capacity. So once the supervisor looks at all that, we determine which one of those they fall under. If they fall under a must house, then we would go, the classification deputy would then look at all of those charges, the bail amounts, all those sorts of same things. They would then look at on how that subject classifies, you know, whether he's a prior gang member or whether he is a prior prison inmate or whether he's a sex registrant, any of those things. I mean, those are only examples, but they would look at those classifications and then they would see if there's room to house him in those units that have that classification.
So who all is involved in this process? You mentioned, you know, the booking deputy and then going to the watch commander. Some people ask, you know, do you guys communicate when somebody comes in? Is the district attorney's office involved? Is probation involved? Any outside agencies, that type of thing?
So normally, like I mentioned, you know, it starts with that booking officer or a booking deputy. Then it goes to the watch commander, then the classification deputy, and they kind of all are the ones that determine whether or not that subject can stay here based on classification. If in fact they do stay and there is room, then of course, you know, we would house them in the facility. If for some reason another person comes in with, let's say, a worse charges or more violent charges, whatever the case may be, and we are looking at maybe releasing somebody that is less than that, then that will go through kind of the same process. It would go back to the watch commander, sometimes goes to the jail lieutenant and or myself. And then outside agencies, really no one else has a say into whether we keep or release somebody outside of a a person who is going through the court process, an inmate that is going through the court process, a judge could order a release, a court OR, or whatever the case may be.
Okay,
On
perfect.
that one.
So who came up with this process? Is it something that's standard that all county jails go through? Is it regulations that come down from the state, that type of thing? This process, where does it come from?
So I think every jail does things a little bit differently. I don't think anybody does everything exactly the same across the board. Our process started back in, I believe it was 1991, when Shasta County actually got that court-ordered court cap, which is that running at 90% of capacity. And so this is kind of the way that we've been doing it since then, and it's obviously a proven way. It's the way we've done it for that long, and it seems to be working.
So this process that we have to follow, whereby we decide whether an inmate is going to be released or kept, is it all simply because of our capacity issues, or are there other factors at play coming down from the state laws, that type of thing?
So obviously, capacity issues are definitely coming to play on that, on how many we can hold. But due to a lot of the law changes that have occurred over the past several years, a lot of inmates that used to be, if you were sentenced to over a year, you would go to state prison. Now a lot of those law changes make it to where some inmates are sentenced to 10, 12, 13 years county time. I think the longest we've had is about 13 years, and now they stay in our facility for that duration instead of actually going to state prison.
So a byproduct to this process that we have to follow because of the capacity issues and some of what you just talked about, the things coming down from the state and those type of regulations and laws. Unfortunately, and this is what I believe the public gets frustrated with, and everybody else, that if we get somebody and we do have somebody come in and they're booked and it's decided that they are going to be kept, unfortunately, we have to look at the roster of who's in here, and somebody most likely has to go, correct?
Well, I wish it was that simple. But, when we look at the 90% court capacity for what we can hold, it's not just overall in the entire facility, it is also in the housing units and or the classification of inmates. So it could be 90% of that housing unit or 90% of that classification. So a lot of people get that kind of confused that, well, your 90% is 292 inmates. Well, I can't necessarily hold 292 at all times because some of those housing units are maxed on that 90% capacity based on that level of inmate. So you're right. So if an inmate comes in and, again, let's say they are a very violent inmate and we're going to hold them and they classify to a certain classification, then we would look at that housing unit with that classification and we would look who is least in there with the least amount of charges, and we would probably release that person so we could house that one coming in.
Okay. Is there ever a point, piggybacking on that, if you had a housing unit like that, like you said, you would look at that housing unit and that least, is there ever a point where you just cannot let anybody out of that housing unit?
Well, and those are the times when it comes to the lieutenant and captain level. When they really have one that they just go, hey, neither one of these is a good release, but they have the determination of who has maybe the least amount of charges or the least likely to offend again or the least likely to be a public safety risk. That's really what we look at. We don't want someone to be released in the street and then become an issue, a public safety risk. So we really look at those sorts of things and try to avoid that at all costs.
Okay. Finally, what would you want to say? I mean, I think this is all good information that people realize that it's not just a random thought process as to who gets released, and that's why we've wanted to do this and do this whole series where we're talking about these issues with the jail. What would you want to say to the public that, they're frustrated? They see somebody that, they're arrested for a property crime or a crime that, stealing vehicles, that type of thing, and they're let out, and then they do it again. And you hear about they call it the revolving door and that type of thing. What would you want to say to the public out there that are frustrated by that?
Yeah, and I understand that the public is frustrated for sure, but the folks in here are too. We want to hold as many as we can as well. We have the men and women that work in here, very hardworking people. They are doing everything that they can to be able to house somebody, to be able to classify them in certain areas of the jail so we can house them. But at some point, we just can't house some. And those property crimes that you were mentioning earlier, those are usually the ones that we can't house because the level of inmate that we have here is usually pretty sophisticated, lots of pretty violent charges. So those property crimes are going to be the ones that are out the door first. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of what we're working with the jail capacities right now. And ultimately, if we were able to get this level of the jail open as soon as we can, we'd be able to house a few more people. And really, that's what we're working towards. The sheriff's office as a whole is trying to find those staffing levels where we can open the jail as soon as practical. So.
Okay, and I think probably where we can end this is, you as the captain of this custody division, as well as anybody, we need the good men and women who would want to serve their community in this career, and there are openings, and we would love to have people that want to serve their community and help get that floor open, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody that's interested at all, for sure give us a call. You can call me, you can call our other captain who's in charge of the hiring process. We can give you a walkthrough of the jail so you can see what it's all about. But we do need people to come in and help us out. And if you're at all interested, please put in your application.
All right. Well, thank you, Captain Stonehouse, for explaining some of that. Hopefully it's understandable to the people. Again, this is recorded. These are a series of videos that we're going to have on our webpage, shastasheriff.org. Under the jail tab, there's a Shasta County Jail, a closer look, and you click that. All of these videos are going to be on there as we do them. Also on shastasheriff.org, as we were discussing, you can go to our career opportunities page and see the criteria for some of these positions and the ones that we have open, and we would appreciate you looking at that, telling people that that might be looking for a career in law enforcement, and apply. And we thank you for watching.
Thank you.